not drift into stress because we're consumed with negative vibes constantly, and we have to drift through them, go around them, go over them, or squeeze them, as you call it here, squeeze through that. So my advice today is to find time for something and to squeeze through and enjoy a positive and fruitful life.
That was Larry Talley. Folks who know Larry call him an icon, an inspiration, and a living miracle. A native of Nashville, Larry grew up with music in his heart. Today, he uses his love for playing music, especially the clarinet, as therapy for himself and others. While coping with COPD, he also learned by bringing music to others, especially to seniors in the community, he could bring a transformative gift to others. Let's learn about the courageous battles this military veteran has fought in life and in the wilderness while serving in Vietnam, and the lessons he's learned. This is a podcast you don't want to miss.
I'm Sally Hussey, the CEO of 50 Forward, and we elected to launch this podcast because we know older adults have such inspiring stories and wisdom worth sharing. We have now all learned that social connections are critical to our well-being. This podcast is made possible by 50 Forward, the leading resource for adults 50 plus in Middle Tennessee who seek to live longer, more fulfilling lives.
You're listening to Squeeze the Day, where we talk to extraordinary people over the age of 50 who are living their best life now. Their stories of a well-lived life are both inspiring and encouraging to all of us as we seek to navigate a meaningful and purpose-driven second chapter in our life. I'm Susan Sizemore, Communications Director for 50 Forward, so let's get started. Larry, you're a native of Nashville and grew up close to downtown in an area that has changed so much. Tell us a bit about those changes.
Well, few neighborhoods remain the same forever, and currently in my old neighborhood, there's a large amount of real estate development going on. Numerous homes and vacant lots have been purchased and replaced with construction and apartments and condos. In fact, the original neighborhood is practically unrecognizable. The amphitheater that's located at General and Meharry Medical College is where my home was. The Meharry Medical College purchased our home, and that's where they hold their graduation ceremonies.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about your history as a graduate of Tennessee State University. One of the things that I know you enjoyed doing was playing in the band.
Well, I started in music in the 5th grade, and I've continually been involved since then. Music has always been a part of my life in some form. At Tennessee State and also in high school, it exposed me to many other people that were preparing their careers in music. And this got me to thinking about becoming professionally involved with music, and ended up not being professionally involved, but playing socially.
So after graduating from TSU, you enrolled in the military and served for 33 years, including as a commanding officer. I'm curious, what made you join the Army?
Well, in fact, I did not join the military. I was drafted.
Uh-huh.
After attending basic courses in the military, basic training, I decided to volunteer for guided missile training in a guided missile unit. Most of the people, all my classmates and associates that were in music, volunteered for the band. And I was one of the few that didn't initially enroll and play in the military band. In fact, Fort Campbell was home to several Tennessee State University musicians, Pearl High School musicians.
Is that where you went to high school? Was Pearl High School?
Yes. I initially started many college-level forms of music. Our band director was a band director in the Army band during World War II. So we were exposed to a lot of music that other high school students were not exposed to. Then from there, Tennessee State, and later the 4 different community bands, and also the 129th Army Band here in town.
You know, it's so interesting how at such a young age, music and any skill that you learn, maybe as an elementary school, how it can become part of your life. And I think hearing you talk about music and the military, I wanted to just talk a little bit about, I know in the military, at one point you touched on the fact that you worked with chemical warfare and that you also served in the military police, armor and air cavalry, as well as in the Army Band. And I know frequently in situations when we get talking about military service that those stories are life-changing, but they're often very difficult to share. And I want to see if you can tell us a bit more about this and why you think that is.
Sure. I had nothing but favorable experiences in the military. I had one unfavorable experience we'll talk about in a little bit in Vietnam, but out of my 33 years in the military, half of those were as an enlisted member and the other half as a commissioned officer. And I had just enjoyable experiences with tanks, armored vehicles, and flying with helicopters. That was very enjoyable and relaxing in a sense, looking at the countryside and being a part of the countryside, getting away from city life. And that's probably, other than the band, that was my favorite part of the military, the armored part with the big tanks and tracks. And it was just like a kid with a toy.
So I also believe after you retired from the military, did you stay involved with the National Guard?
Yes. The last 30 years, or just a little less, were in the reserve system. There was 15 in the National Guard, 15 in the Army Reserve. Because of me working civilian-wise on weekends, eventually I had conflicts and had to resign from one service, and when times changed, when available or opportunity arose, re-enlist in another service. So I was going back and forth, but I was able to get 30 good years and also retirement from Bell South along with the military. I got the two of them to coincide.
Well, that's not only smart planning, but good for you and good for us to have a man of your caliber serving. I really appreciate that you shared, a little bit of all of this with us, and that you continue to see as the National Guard can continue to serve our country in many different ways. That's just really a great gift for all of us.
In fact, the last 10 years of my service was in the 129th Tennessee Army National Guard Band. That was the most favorable experience I had of all the 30 years in the service. Most people think of the military as soldiers with rifles and live in the field, but as a musician, it was hopping on the bus and playing a concert.
And getting to see a bit of the country and the world at the same time.
Right.
That's great. What a smart choice. And I know, initially, and I've had conversations with other people who have served in the military too, there are parts of that you often want to push to the back or shelf because they're difficult experiences. And when we casually had a conversation about a presentation you made at one of our 50 Forward centers on Veterans Day about your experience in Vietnam, I not only was shocked, but I also thought that's a story that I never would have thought and have never heard from a military servant. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about your time in Vietnam and a very unusual battle that you faced.
Okay, yes, I'll be glad to do that. It's kind of long and complicated, but I'll cut it short, but get the point across. One night on perimeter guard, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, no starlight outside there. It was pretty dark. You could barely see anything up close. My instinct was to look to the right of me as I was laying there. And to the right of me appeared to be an animal. His head was lowered like a duck, and I could only see about 1 foot of the neck. So initially my heart started pounding. Then I said to myself, relax. It's some form of Asian fowl, maybe Asian chicken or an Asian duck, but it has a long neck. And about a minute or so later, it raised up maybe 2 to 3 feet in the air. And I was thinking, whoa, calm down. Maybe this is an Asian ostrich. I couldn't determine. It was so dark at night, and it was just quiet and still, and the animal wasn't making any noise. Then all of a sudden, it rose up in the air and dropped on top of me. It was a 20-foot or better python snake. It was a reticulated python that's in Asia. He opened his mouth and put it at my face. In fact, my face could almost fit entirely in his mouth. I was looking at him eyeball to eyeball. His tongue was right at the tip of my nose. I was looking at his rows of teeth, and I was breathing, inhaling and exhaling his breath. And I knew that in a second, he was going to rip my face off. I was scared to blink my eye, thinking he would consider that aggression. So I held my eye as long as I could, maybe 25, 30 seconds. Then I just had to blink. So I kind of said to myself, here we go. This is it. And I couldn't move because the snake felt like a refrigerator laying on me. You know, I couldn't move him in any capacity. So I blinked as slow a manner as I could. And as I completed the blinking of the eye, he started the wrapping process. And he whipped around in all types of configurations and immediately had my 2 ankles crushing in each other. And he looped up under my body and around. It's hard to explain, but there were several loops going on at the same time. But he didn't get my head and neck. And that's what he kept trying. And for some reason, he wasn't as strong right there at his head and neck. And I kept moving my head out of his reach back and forth. But in the meantime, I said I better do something because the pressure of the snake was becoming stronger and stronger. And I said, I'm going to have to do something quick. So I tried to pull him forward or push him off. He wouldn't budge. I tried to pick him up. He wouldn't budge. He was that heavy. I couldn't get to my weapon or bayonet or anything, which was laying next to me, but I waited too late thinking it was no problem. So I grabbed him by the neck. I said, I'm going to have to hurt him to get his mind off of what he's thinking about doing with me. So I started biting into his neck repeatedly and just pressing my teeth into him hard as I could. But my teeth kept sliding off. His skin is just like a volleyball. It's slippery like a volleyball. After becoming exhausted after several biting attempts, I said, well, this is it. There's nothing else I can do. My mind wasn't on screaming out anything. I didn't want to become a target by making a whole lot of noise, and I couldn't just up and try to run if I could in the dark. I didn't know didn't know where I was, and there are several other guys out there with their hands on the trigger in the night, and I don't think they would deal with me properly, stumbling near them in the dark. Anyway, so I just remained still, and he pushed me back onto my back, and he was getting stronger and stronger constriction. So I said to myself, it was the best I could do without screaming out loud. I was holding it as best I could. I said, you'll probably be dead in 20, 30 seconds at the rate this is going. So I just kind of tightened up and held my voice to keep from screaming out, and I just waited to die. And within a few seconds, it stopped. I felt a release. I said, uh-oh, maybe he's changed his mind. Let me just stay still. Just stay still and calm. He eventually started uncoiling and uncoiling and uncoiling, and all over my body. He released the grip until he was just horizontal across me. And then he started going to the right. Just little by little, he was leaving. And he was big around as any large cantaloupe. I mean, he was huge. He was almost the size of a volleyball in certain parts of him. And he just got bigger and bigger as he was leaving. Then it came about center ways of the snake. It was his stomach. And if it was a female, then she was pregnant. Or if it was a male, it was his stomach. It wasn't the regular skin of the snake. It was a different kind of normal-looking skin, bulged out there, about the size of the seat of a normal chair. It was huge. But it kept crawling, and right after that midsection, it started getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until he was gone. Then I had a sigh of relief. So I immediately grabbed my weapon and raised up to empty a magazine into it, but it was gone. It was dark. And I thought that it was headed in that direction, so I'm going to stay where I am. Usually those type snakes go underground in a hole someplace. And so that's somebody else's problem down the line. And I got myself back together, took slow breaths and sigh of relief, and remaining calm and continued with the rest of the night, just observing the jungle lion or whatever, just listening post. And that was it. And the next day we picked up. I didn't complain about it. I felt guilty complaining because I had no outward injuries, no broken arm or bleeding anywhere or anything. And a lot of guys were coming out of the field on stretchers, encased in blood, So I felt guilty complaining about a sore back and just downplayed it and didn't see a doctor, didn't do anything about it. It was just, this is what I have to live with. That was my attitude back then. I thought I was a little bit tough, and I thought, no problem. And the rest is history. I struggled the rest of my life, back trouble, but I hid it, wouldn't tell anyone, especially an old employee with back trouble. That's a guarantee that you'd be calling in sick on a regular basis. So I kept it to myself, and I just lived with it the best I could.
Good grief. That is the most terrifying story, and I can't imagine something coming out of the dark. To me, that is just horrific, and I guess it wasn't your time, but thank God you survived that, and maybe the sense of calm brought you forward, and it wasn't to be, but I'm so glad you're sharing that story now. I know that you've mentioned the pain and that you still are suffering some back pain, and we talked a little bit about real-life struggles, not only related to after the war and that incident, but also you went through a divorce and lost your parents. And I want to talk a little bit about how you found relief from all of that.
I know this isn't the proper way of doing it, but I didn't want to seek help in a professional manner because I didn't want to live with the stigma of that. So I thought I would just drink my problems away. And in fact, I did. And in fact, I became a heavy drinker. And yet my problems were gone that night of that day. They were right back facing me head on the next day. So this was a continual process. So I eventually started going to the YMCA and being around people talking, and I began walking, and walking in the pool and walking on the track and walking outside down the roads, down the highway and back. And I started getting relief by not thinking about what had taken place, because I knew no one would believe it. It was an unbelievable story. In fact, the few times I mentioned it to some reliable, educated, respectable people, they thought I was lying, thought I was making a joke of it, and they couldn't believe it. And that just reinforced me not telling anybody anything. I'm going to live with it. And for years, I would wake up in the middle of the night and see his face wide open over my body, and I could wake up in the middle of the night and smell his breath. In fact, I can still smell that Python's breath. It's a strange smell, and I can't identify it, but I can just smell it, and it's different. So eventually the dreams and whatnot stopped, but the pain remained, and I ended up having 2 surgeries. And the last surgery was caused because of my back breaking in half. My spinal column just totally broke in half. There was a gap between my upper body and lower body. And when I saw that on the CT scan, I was shocked. How could I even stand up? How could I walk with not a stable spinal cord all the way down. So I had 2 rods put in from my spinal column into my waistline into my pelvis, and screwing the titanium rods into my pelvis, reattaching it to my upper back, and screws up the titanium rod into the my spine, and that's how I was stabilized, and that's how I am now. And I have a marginal amount of pain that I live with. In fact, there are days when I have absolutely no pain. It's shocking to realize, wow, but I've learned to live with pain. And the main thing is not to think about it. That's difficult to do, but you have to stay busy. Idle time is the devil's workshop, old expression. That's how I struggle with it.
So I was going to ask you, and I still am curious, what advice would you give to others that are dealing with similar struggles? Did you have any counseling, or maybe it's just staying busy and keeping a focus outside of yourself?
Yes, everyone's personality is different. I have 2 things will help. One thing is to stay busy. Never sit around idle. Get involved in the community activity, 54, the YMCA, social clubs, the neighborhood association, just anything to stay busy. Little league baseball, soccer, and whatever, but have something to do, if not every day, every weekend. And talk it out, but you can only talk it out with people who've had your own experiences. And the veterans that were far forward, the tip of the spear out there that saw this atrocious activity every day, you can only talk about it with people who did the same. Mm-hmm. Other veterans cannot help you. You just don't know. If you didn't personally experience that, digging foxholes, hand-to-hand combat, being shot at, explosions around you, or that lifestyle, you can only talk with people who've also experienced it. And to make sense out of it, to joke about it, and compliment each other about how you survived. And then there's medication, but it all depends on your personality, how you attack that and resolve it.
That's really some great guidance. And I think, you not only have you retired now from military service in Bell South, but music still plays a really big role in your life. Will you tell us a little bit about giving back through music and some of the things you're doing now?
I belong to 4 different bands. The Nashville Community Concert Band, the Silver Notes Band, my personal band, the Metro Wind Ensemble, and the American Legion Band. And these are all volunteer groups, and we perform all over the city for different civic functions. In fact, Nashville Community Concert Band performed at the Skimmerhorn, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, one night. And the other groups were performing at nursing homes, senior living communities, churches, civic groups, neighborhood associations, those type of organizations. And the fact that it's voluntary, it's fun to play. It's fun to rehearse. I have no desire to perform professionally. When you perform professionally and are paid and sign a contract, you have to be there. You have to perform. You expect it to be error-free. It's a job. Performing professionally is a job, and you really have to like it. I don't like it to that extent and think that I'm that professional that you have to pay to hear me. But I enjoy performing in the community, even with the kids. We've had a couple of concerts with the kids, and we let the kids come up and conduct a group while we're playing. But I love to, as I'm playing, to look out in the audience, sometimes 10, sometimes 110, but to see the expressions on the faces before, during, and afterwards. And sometimes pick out who will like this song. Let's see, who will start patting their foot or kind of moving their head a little bit, and just doing those type of things to make it enjoyable, the entire process.
And I know that not only with COVID, but COPD, that you've had some physical challenges too that you faced, and music has become a bit of therapy for you. Would you like to talk a bit about that?
Well, 2020 caused a big problem for all of us. All the activity I had mentioned, playing in 4 bands a week, going to rehearsal every week, going to the YMCA, walking in the pool every other day. So I was extremely busy. So with COVID, all that came to a stop, an immediate stop. Now this caused problems. So I had to find ways to supplement that time rather to start drifting into negativity since I couldn't perform anymore or rehearse. So I started walking. I started doing with more intensity my breathing exercises, diaphragmatic breathing process. I also have an assortment of little plastic devices or breathing devices that you can inhale and exhale in to strengthen the lungs. That helped a lot. And I got more involved in the TV. I seldom, if ever, look at sitcoms, but I love documentaries, the National Geographic, and the History Channel. I'm consumed in those. In fact, pretty much at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. That's one of my problems. I can't stop until 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning when other people are waking up. But I have a strong interest in the world, the politics of the world, how nations get along or not get along, people in the community, the faith, and religion and churches, the educational process, everything from that level. It really intrigues me where we've been, where we are now, and what the future might hold for the next generation.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you're a lifelong learner.
Yes, I'm adventurous. I like to know things. I'm flattered to learn something. In fact, pretty much everything I've said, someone else has told me. Well, I've learned it from different classwork, correspondence courses, and so forth that I get involved in.
I think it's important for people to know, too, that you're not a pianist or a drummer. What instrument do you play?
Oh, clarinet. I'm a lifelong clarinetist. The clarinetists needed everywhere in most bands. Clarinet is one instrument that most clarinet players use as a stepping stone to the saxophone. Practically all the former clarinet players I've known through middle school, high school, college, and army band, they're playing saxophone. And they're playing, or as they call it, gigging, all around town, and some on luxury liners, these boats. But anyway, playing the sax is only a minor difference than the clarinet. But to me, that's still a hassle to learn. At this age, I'm literally too old to learn,
I wondered what made you opt to stay with the clarinet.
Yeah, and in fact, it's frustrating to try to learn and forget and start over, back and forth. So what I know thoroughly, 100%, I stick with, and that's my expertise. In fact, I consider myself capable of playing in any band at any level. I had, on a couple of different occasions, lessons from symphony players. In fact, a couple here in town at the school from the clarinetists were part of the Nashville Symphony.
So I'm curious, too. We ask every one of our guests about a piece of advice that your parents or an older adult might have shared with you that at the time you thought it was really silly, but now it rings true to your everyday life. Is there something that comes to mind?
Yes, there's one thing in particular from my mother. At the time, I did think it was kind of silly, yeah. She would say, "Boy, you better put on a hat and cover your head when you go outside. You ought to button up that top button, Don't leave this house without zipping up your jacket." And I thought it was kind of humorous, but I understand what she was saying. You can't catch a cold in this bad weather if you aren't covered up. But I didn't like wearing hats because they would give me a headache eventually. But I had to put on a hat or not, I wouldn't be able to leave the house.
And now it keeps the sun off your head, I would gather.
Yeah.
I also wonder what it is, Larry, that you do to squeeze the day.
Balance in life is the key to living a fruitful life, productive life, but squeezing is to find time for something. So my squeeze for the day is to find something that you don't normally do, but would be pleasurable in general to you, to not drift into stress, because we're consumed with negative vibes constantly, and we have to drift through them, go around them, go over them, or squeeze them, as you call it here, squeeze through that. So my advice today is to find time for something and to squeeze through and enjoy a positive and fruitful life.
It sounds to me like you've done that most of your life, and I hadn't really thought about the analogy to a python and squeezing, but I'm so glad you squeezed through that one and survived. Thank you so much for joining us today, Larry. What an amazing life of leadership we're witnessing from interviews and stories such as yours.
Thanks for having me.
Now we challenge everyone listening to go squeeze the day.